Hey there, Brew Crew. Welcome back to my Brew City Garden. Today's June 5th, and it's been approximately 1 week since I transplanted all my transplants into the bales. Some of them are doing really well, some of them aren't doing very well at all. And I kind of want to show you what transplant shock looks like. That way maybe you can identify it in your garden and not get it mixed up with, say, overwatering or maybe underwatering. It's pretty easy to pick out, and it's pretty easy to tell because it happens right after you transplant. So you're gonna lose a few plants, like I had mentioned before. It's not that big of a deal. The weather here has been really up and down. The weekend that I transplanted, it got very hot. It was in the mid to upper 90s. And then over the last week, it cooled down. At some points it was in the 40s at night, which is not ideal, especially for these warmer weather plants such as my tomatoes and my peppers. But during the daytime it's been fairly steady. We had a couple of overcast days after the transplants were in, which were very helpful because I didn't have a lot of time to harden my plants off. And over the last week, or the last few days I should say, it's been around 70 degrees, especially during midday, which is okay, which is good. This time of year I expect it to be a little bit warmer, but this is Brew City. This is Milwaukee. We're next to the lake. You really never know what is going to happen weather-wise. So it really makes gardening a little more tricky here versus other inland areas. But that's okay. We like to be thrown a curveball once in a while. That's how we learn. So I just want to show you how everything's doing. Just a quick tour through the garden to see how the transplants are doing, to see how the back garden looks, the buckets, and actually there's a couple of unexpected but pleasant surprises. So come on, I'll show you. So as far as the pepper transplants are concerned, we really run the gamut as to how they responded to transplanting. Some of these peppers are doing phenomenal, and we've got some little blooms, actual little fruits on this plant already. So I couldn't be happier. The leaf structure and the color and the texture for the weather that we're having now is really good, and I'm really happy with it. There is some purpling, but that's just indicative of the colder weather. Nothing to worry about there. Now if we move next door, this is textbook transplant shock right here. All the leaves fell off, and I really should have known better, and I did know better when I transplanted this pepper, because it did have a lot of flowers on it, and it actually had a fruit on it, about a 2-inch fruit on it. And typically when you've got fruit and flowers on your plants, it's not ideal conditions to be transplanting. If I had better forethought, I would have plucked the blooms and cut the fruit off about a week before I went ahead and transplanted. I like to experiment a little bit, and there's a couple of plants that had fruits on them that I transplanted. So I wanted to see how well it would do. Unfortunately, this one didn't do very well at all. As you can see, all the leaves have fallen off. I've got just a tiny bit of new growth right here, and I'm not sure how that's gonna turn out. What I'm gonna do is give this another week and a half to 2 weeks. If I don't get any new growth out of this plant, we're gonna go ahead and pull it out of the bale. We're gonna go to the garden store, pick out something cool, and replace it. So, it's not a big deal. Now, if we move next door to it, this is the other plant that had a fruit on it. And it took to the transplant really well. So, it's kind of a crapshoot. You just don't know how it's gonna go. The rest of these peppers, some look really good, some are looking a little poor. But really, I think this is the only one that may not come back. And that's okay. This plant, like I said, did have a small fruit on it, approximately the size of this one here. So I did pluck that fruit off and I did eat it and it was delicious. So I can't say I didn't get anything out of it. So, you know, that's just how it goes. But otherwise, these peppers really look good for being in Wisconsin at 70 degrees. So as far as that's concerned, I'm fairly happy with it. This year, the tomatoes seem to be having a little bit tougher time. And I think that's partially because I started my tomatoes a little bit late this year and they were a little bit smaller when I put them in the bales. They will bounce back. The weather's been cool, so I can't expect a whole lot. I did have one casualty here, and I kind of tried to stick it back in to see if it would reroot, and it simply didn't. And I know what happened to this plant. It was a cutworm came along and just chopped it off right at the stem, and I found it laying over on its side the next day. And you know, that's just one of those garden pests that are really hard to keep under control. Usually they're not a big problem. They might take 1 or 2 plants a year, and that's the end of it. If you see them, I'll just pull them out and throw them in the driveway for the birds, or just give them a little squish. Otherwise, the tomatoes, like I said, looking a little bit wimpy, but really when we start getting some weather in the upper 70s to 80s, these things will spring back to life and they'll just start taking off. Not worried about it. So far, so good. Now this right here, these are my ground cherries, and this is the reason why I love to use these spent bales in containers and put them in the back garden. I really have fewer troubles with using last year's and previous year's straw versus using fresh straw. I never get mushrooms out of last year's straw. It seems to me much more broken down and more conducive to plant growth. I had 0 troubles out of last year's straw in these containers and in the back garden. I really love using the old straw, and I think when I go on a more permanent basis, I'll start building more beds to put all this used straw in, and eventually stop using fresh bales altogether, or very few, just to top off the beds. And I think I'll have much better luck going that route. That's probably a few years down the road, but definitely something to think about. This old straw is probably the best growing medium I've ever used. I did transplant a small line of Brussels sprouts in a couple of bales here. And at first I was a little iffy because the weather was so hot, but now that it's cooled down into the 70s again, these things look awesome. If you haven't had garden fresh Brussels sprouts, trust me, it's nothing like you get in the store. They are delicious. They're not bitter, they're sweet. If you haven't grown your own Brussels sprouts, you absolutely have to try it. Here's the bales that we planted the pole beans in the other day. Nothing going on here yet, and I really don't expect anything until the weather warms up. Anytime you plant pole beans or bush beans, the soil really needs to be warm. So once we start getting days into the 80s, that's when I'll expect to start seeing sprouts. If we get too many weeks of cooler weather, there's a good chance I'll have to come back and replant these, because they'll just simply rot in the ground, or the birds and squirrels will come and get them all. Beans are a little finicky. They don't like the hot weather, and I took a little bit of a chance planting them early, but at that time it was hot. So, you know, like I said, you never really know what the weather's going to do. If we get a couple more weeks of cool weather, I'll come back and replant. And if they all end up coming up, it's not a big deal. These beans, you can plant them so close to each other and they do just fine. You'll just end up with more beans in the end. Maybe a tangled mess, but more beans. Okay guys, and another thing that makes me very happy is, I don't know if you can see that, but it looks like our cucumbers are already germinating. And I've got several plants here coming up. That is a fantastic sign. I love to see that. And I remember how deep we planted these. I planted them all the way down to my knuckle. And you know, if you're worried about your seeds making it up through these bales, have no fear, guys. They will come up. As you can see, we've still got mushrooms. They have they've curtailed a little now that the weather's cooler. I expect these to be gone in the next week or two once they fulfill their life cycle. You know, they're a little annoying, but for the most part, they're harmless. That's a really good sign, guys. I like what's happening here. So while I'm out here in the garden, I just want to move my snakes. I found that if I keep them in the same place all the time, that perhaps the animals start catching on and realize that they are not real. So when if you put your snakes out, like I'm doing, just move them around once in a while. Just a couple feet, different position. It's really all it takes. So the bucket system, you know, this is a really convenient system. It's self-watering. I've got 18 buckets here total, which will all be tomato plants. And the majority of my tomato harvest will come out of this system. It's just super convenient. It was really easy to put together. It's just a great way to go if you only have maybe a driveway or something. It doesn't have to be this big, or it can be larger if you want. But growing tomatoes this way, or anything for that matter, is really a cool way to go. It's super easy. The only weeding I have to do is obviously the cracks in my driveway, so it's a nice way to go. These tomatoes I planted on the same day, transplanted on the same day, and they're all doing really well for the most part. And you can see these buckets are about 6 inches from the top full of soil. And what I'm doing is waiting for these plants to really become established. And I'll use some spent straw to top these off to help hold moisture in. When it gets really hot in the summertime, I'll have to water these buckets at least twice a day, because when the tomatoes get big, they get thirsty and they'll drink it all up very quickly. And I think that straw will really help hold moisture in, and it'll build up that soil level a little bit, so we might get some extra root growth. Looking forward to see how well that works this year. Previously, I've just filled these buckets almost to the top with soil, which worked fine, but boy, they dried out quickly. So I'm hoping the straw will help negate that this year. So as you recall, I planted some backup plants for the seeds that I sowed directly in the bales. And these are looking really good. I mean, we've got zucchinis, the pickling cucumbers, lemon cucumbers are coming up already, some okra, which I'm looking forward to trying this year for the first time. We're still waiting on the squash to come up, and the watermelon. It's been a little cool, so once that weather warms up, I'm certain we're going to see these sprouts come up. But so far so good. For just being a few days, the germination rate is outstanding. I did have this tray in the garage. Now that I see these sprouts coming out, we'll leave them outside, and they'll immediately be acclimated to the sun. And in the back garden, everything is looking really good as well. As you remember, on this side of the garden, I planted the 3 varieties of potatoes. And if we look, we've got potatoes coming up already. How do you like that? So that's a good sign. I like to see that. We got them in a little bit late this year, and they're already poking their little heads through. So no doubt we'll get potatoes this year. Not sure how great the harvest is going to be, but we will get them. The yacon transplanted very well for being a tropical plant and then getting hit by these really cool temps at night. I was a little fearful, but as you can see, for the most part, they're really happy. And the tobacco, we've already got several inches of fresh growth. Everything looks really good. I love using this spent straw. It really is the best growing medium I've found yet. It holds moisture very well. It's extremely fertile, and it's easy to pull weeds from. I would almost venture to say I prefer using the old bales in a bed style system than I do using the fresh bales. And I really love using fresh bales. So this way of gardening, to me, just can't be beat. All right, guys, thanks again for joining me here at the Brew City Garden for this little update. I just wanted to show you how things were looking. And in case you're wondering, yes, I did check on the carrots, and no, they're not coming up yet. I'll keep an eye on them for the next week or two. If it looks like we're getting poor germination rates, I still have time to go back and re-sow. We could sow carrots into even July if we need to. It's not preferable, but it'll still work. The soil's already laid down on the edge of the bale, so if I have to replant, it's just a matter of sprinkling my seeds on there and mixing them in a little bit. So it's not a big deal. I would like to see them come up, obviously. It was a lot of work putting them in, but that's just gardening. You know, sometimes you get a lot of work and it doesn't work out, unfortunately. But it's not a big deal. You know, if you just enjoy gardening and being out in the garden, then whatever, you know, it's just fun. So again, thanks for joining me here and seeing how everything looks and where we're at here in early June. And make sure you stay tuned, because I want to go over the watering system, my drip system, my watering timer, just the whole irrigation system, where I get it and how I put it together. So that's going to be coming up. So make sure you like, comment, or subscribe, and I'll definitely keep you updated on the garden this year. I'm having so much fun making these videos, and the feedback that I'm getting from you guys is awesome. So thank you. If you've got any questions at all, just leave them down below. I promise I'll answer them for you. All right, guys, we'll see you.